A good morning to our esteemed viewers. Welcome back to yet another exclusive interview on creating awareness in our great nation, Uganda. I bring to your attention that ignorance of the law is no defense. And with me in studio is Miss Jacqueline Okwi, the Chief State Attorney and the Public Relations Officer from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Many of you don't know how to go about the law, but today she's going to delve into the great details of the law and explain how it's domesticated and how it's applied in our families, in our working environments, and in our society.
Thank you very much.
In the Ugandan Constitution, Article 2 specifies that the Constitution is the supreme law that governs the great nation Uganda. But the law involves both the criminal and the civil. So I would like Ms. Jacqueline to go ahead and explain to us what the office of the DPP exactly does, because we have very many Ugandans that are ignorant of the law. There's a lot of information gap in the country.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I would like to say that the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is a very significant office in the criminal justice system. We are created under Article 120 of the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. And our mandate is, first and foremost, to direct the police to investigate any information of a criminal nature and report to the Director of Public Prosecutions expeditiously. And in this regard, we are the ones who guide the police on what kinds of criminal investigations to conduct. When members of the public report crimes to the police open up case files, what they call police case files, and then they begin to conduct investigations. And by conducting investigations, they obtain evidence, which they put in those case files. The evidence includes statements from witnesses. So we have cases where the police go ahead and commence investigations, and then they submit the case files to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions for perusal and advice. When we receive these files, we read the evidence therein, and if we find that there is need to conduct further investigations into a matter, then we direct the police on what further investigations to conduct. Specifically, tell them where to go and what to get. But we also have what we call prosecution-guided investigations. This is something that came up after some time because we realized that there was need to carry out investigations more effectively. So when it comes to prosecution-guided investigations, the prosecution gets involved in investigations at the earliest opportunity of a case, that is, as and when it is reported. And this we do mainly with very big cases, high-profile cases, very sensitive cases. So immediately a crime is committed, let's say as a high-profile murder. Yes. The police will inform us early enough, and then we shall get involved in the investigation early enough. Okay. And the reason for this is because we would like to have investigations that are more efficiently done and that will most likely result in a conviction in court.
So besides the police, are there other state departments or agencies that you work with in conducting this investigation?
So when it comes to investigations, we work majorly with the police, and particularly the Criminal Investigations Directorate. However, we also involve other institutions when it comes to investigations. For instance, when it comes to obtaining forensic evidence, then we would involve the Government Analytical Laboratory. When it comes to investigations of a financial nature, we may involve the Financial Intelligence Authority. So it depends on the kind of case that we are investigating. So sometimes we form investigation teams that involve other institutions that are very relevant. For instance, we can involve the government valuer when it comes to a matter that relates to financial investigations.
So earlier you spoke of guiding the police on conducting certain investigations and when they get to convict people. So we have had cases where people get convicted or they are arrested, but they are not taken to trial immediately. Case in point was the 2021 election period. There are families that are still complaining that their people are missing, they haven't been taken to trial, but they were arrested. What role does the Office of the DPP have in this?
So now, when it comes to investigations by the police in conjunction with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, when the police have done investigations and they produce a file before the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, there are a number of decisions that we take when we read those files. So if I have talked about when we find that investigations are not fully done, but also we have cases where investigations are fully done when we find that the evidence that has been collected by the police is sufficient for a prosecution. We sanction charges. So our office determines what charges a person will be faced with. For instance, whether it will be a murder charge or attempted murder charge. So we will sanction those charges, and once we sanction charges, then a person will have to appear before court for trial. But then again, we have cases where we find that the evidence is insufficient to sustain any criminal charge against a person. So in those cases, we will close the case files, especially where there are no areas for further investigations. The matter has been conclusively investigated and the evidence is insufficient to sustain any charges, any criminal charges against a person. We will direct the police to close those case files, and if a person has been arrested, if a suspect has been arrested, then the person will have to be released unless held on other charges.
Then there are case scenarios where people have been tried, but they are not content with the results from the judge. Like they find the judge's ruling unfair. So they get to petition to 2 different courts. How does the Office of the DPP take on such charges? Like, should we take it that the office does not have enough evidence secured against these people?
Patricia, let me talk about another role of the Office of the DPP, because the one of investigation was just one.
Yeah.
So the second role of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is to institute criminal proceedings in any court with competent jurisdiction apart from the court-martial. So we also prosecute criminal cases, criminal, not civil cases. And these cases include cases like murder cases, aggravated robbery, thefts, assaults, anything to do with crime. Yes. And when we talk about prosecution, because we know that a good number of members of the public don't understand what prosecution means. But prosecution involves, sanctioning the charges, taking a matter to court. And once a matter has been taken to court and a suspect has appeared in court, charges have been read out to the suspect, and the suspect has either pleaded guilty or not guilty. Let's say, for instance, the suspect pleads not guilty. In that case, we will have to prove the case against the suspect beyond reasonable doubt. That's the standard. And that is our burden as the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. We have to prove the case beyond reasonable doubt. And how do we prove the cases? We prove the cases through witnesses. So we will call witnesses to court and examine them in court, ask them questions so that they can narrate the ordeals that can prove the case against the accused person or the suspect beyond reasonable doubt. So usually in these cases, the witnesses are the members of the public.
How about someone plants witnesses?
Well, you know that we apply penal laws, for instance, the Penal Code Act. So if we discover that someone has planted witnesses or has given false testimony, we have offenses in the Penal Code Act that relate to charging people with giving false testimony. So we go after those ones. So it is very important that members of the public cooperate with our office and give good and correct testimony, credible testimony that is truthful. Patricia, you were talking about cases that end up in acquittals and then what next?
Yes.
So when we have proved cases against accused persons beyond reasonable doubt, then they are convicted. And after conviction by the court, they are sentenced. Usually, those convicted persons have rights of appeal. So they can appeal to a higher court against the conviction and the sentence. And sometimes we do not get accused persons convicted. We may try to prove a case and fail. In that case, the accused person will be acquitted by the court. But we also have a right of appeal as the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. So for instance, if a case has been handled in a magistrate's court, let's say a chief magistrate's court, and we lose the case, we have a right of appeal in the High Court in respect to that case. But also, we don't just appeal cases for the sake of it. We look at the record of proceedings. We rely on what has transpired in the lower court. Because sometimes we start with cases when they are good. They are good on paper. They are good in a police file. You read a police file and you're satisfied with the evidence. When it comes to the hearing of a case, things may not go as well as they are in the paper, in the file, in the papers. In the case file, you may have 4 witnesses that made statements. Let's say it was in 2015. And let's say a case comes up for hearing in 2020. Let's say it's a matter that has been cause listed in a session. By the time the case comes up for hearing, maybe 2 of the witnesses are dead.
Or they're not around.
Or they're not available for one reason or another. So you end up having 2 witnesses and they may not be very substantial. And you end up losing the case. So then at this point of determining whether to appeal or not, you're going to look at the evidence that you adduced in court. Was it sufficient? And so you determine whether you have any ground of appeal, any justification for appeal. So if you consider the case and you are confident that you have a ground of appeal, you can argue it out and win, then you can go ahead and appeal. But if you see that the case really did not go well and there's hardly any chance of you succeeding on appeal, then you would be slow to lodge an appeal in the next court.
In case I reappeal and I lose in the appeal, do they increase my sentence or I'm left at the same sentence that I was given in the previous court?
So what happens with appeals against sentence, if a convict appeals against a sentence, we as the Office of the DPP will appear in those proceedings and we shall argue for that sentence, in support of that sentence. So while the convict is saying the sentence was harsh, it was excessive, we will go and say, no, it was commensurate. It was, yes, it was commensurate to the crime that was committed. Yes. So then the court will determine whether it was harsh or not. The court will not enhance the sentence unless we have cross-appealed. So if, for instance, the convict appeals and says the sentence was excessive, it was harsh, we can cross-appeal and say, in fact, it was far less than it should have been. So it should have been more than that. And then we will argue that it should have been more than that. So that is when now the court will decide whether to enhance or not. And it can actually enhance it, depending on the circumstances of the case. You know, there's a case that we handled of a similar nature. It was a human sacrifice case involving a child. And the convict appealed in the Court of Appeal against the sentence, saying that it was excessive. We cross-appealed and said, actually, this man got a lesser sentence than he should have got because the child had suffered so much. This child had been kidnapped and was taken to a shrine, and then they drained blood from her every day and threw her in a latrine. So she was recovered and she had to be taken for medical attention. But she suffered so much, she ended up failing to walk. She ended up with organs that were destroyed, damaged. And so her condition was really bad. So during the hearing of this appeal in the Court of Appeal, we actually produced the victim in court. And the justices of appeal were able to look at the victim, and they agreed with the prosecution that this man deserved a higher sentence than he had gotten. And he was given a higher sentence. He actually ended up with imprisonment for life.
So speaking of that case scenario, we have cultural laws that conflict or contradict with the supreme law, the Constitution. So, for example, you can give like the Bagiso. In their culture, it is compulsory for someone to undergo circumcision. But someone can choose not to go for the circumcision activity. How, if this person comes to court to report that people back home are forcing me to undergo a certain culture activity and I am not willing, is this person heard?
You know, the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda is very clear. It's the supreme law of the land.
Yes.
So it supersedes even culture. I will give an example. We have cultures, for instance, where people of about 16 years old can be married, yes, married off, young girls. But when you marry off a 16-year-old girl, we can charge you with defilement. We charge with defilement because what is defilement? Having sexual intercourse with a child, a person below the age of 18 years. So we charge. We do not take into consideration culture that is contrary to the law.
Because the law advises us, or it gives us freedom to enjoy the law, but without causing harm or
yes,
disorienting other people
yes,
around us. So, what other mandates does the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions handle?
Thank you, Patricia. So, apart from being involved in investigations and prosecutions, when members of the public decide to take matters to court, criminal matters to court privately, we have the mandate to take over private prosecutions or matters that have been instituted privately by any person or authority and continue these matters in court or discontinue them. That is one. And then lastly, we also have the mandate to withdraw criminal proceedings from courts of law, but this is only before judgment by the court, and it is a preserve of the Director of Public Prosecutions. So, for instance, state attorneys and other officers of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions cannot withdraw criminal matters in court. It is only the Director of Public Prosecutions. And she usually does this using two documents. If the matter is in the Chief Magistrate's Court, she uses what we call a withdrawal form that says that the Director of Public Prosecutions has decided to discontinue proceedings against X, Y, and Z for such and such an offense. And if the matter is in the High Court, then she uses what we call a nolle prosequi. So maybe I would explain that the High Court handles capital cases. Higher cases like murders, aggravated robberies, aggravated defilements. So the withdrawal form in respect of the High Court is different.
There's a lot of knowledge gap, but this is because of the information gap that is going on today. So someone could perform or could steal something. Under what circumstances is this person arrested? Under what circumstances is this person convicted and taken to trial?
So for instance, we have what we call the Penal Code Act. The Penal Code Act is an act that comprises offenses. And the Penal Code Act describes each offense. So for instance, yes, for instance, the offense of theft will be described with its penalty. So if a person does an act which is in line with an offense in the penal laws of the land, you are taken to have committed an offense. And ignorance of the law is no defense. So the moment, for instance, the police get a report that you have committed an offense, they are going to investigate that matter, and if they find that an offense was actually committed, the person will be arrested and will most likely, if his act fits within that law, will most likely have to face court, and a judgment will have to be entered in respect of that matter.
So today we have a voice of human trafficking, and it's not only here in Uganda, it's across the globe. And human trafficking is in all different kinds of forms. Child labor, they have online trafficking, we have labor trafficking. So, and many people are victims without actually knowing that they're victims of human trafficking, because some of these activities look normal. We have gotten to get so used to them in community, and we think they're part of our lives. What is the Office of the DPP doing to combat this crime of human trafficking in the country?
Thank you, Patricia. So the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is doing a lot to combat trafficking in persons. First and foremost, we are involved in the investigation of trafficking in persons cases in Uganda. We direct the police to investigate trafficking in persons cases and to report to us. And so they submit case files of trafficking in persons to us, and we determine which cases to take to court and which ones not to take to court. The ones we take to court, we sanction, and after we have taken them to court, we prosecute them to their logical conclusions. In respect to investigations, we are also involved with the police in prosecution-guided investigations. So we have, especially the very high-profile cases of trafficking in persons, we get involved in these investigations at the earliest opportunity, and we have them investigated thoroughly with the aim of ensuring that they end in successful outcomes, and also to ensure that the investigations are carried out speedily, without unnecessary delays. When we take these matters to court, we ensure that the cases are prosecuted with a victim-centered approach. And one of the ways that we prosecute these cases is through plea bargains. A plea bargain is where the Office of the DPP or the state comes to an agreement with an accused person who has decided to plead guilty to an offense for either a lesser punishment or a lesser charge, or both. And this is because the accused person has decided to plead guilty at the earliest opportunity, meaning that we don't have to go through a lengthy trial for the case to be concluded. And the advantage of this is that it leads to quicker justice. A case is concluded in a shorter time than if we were to go through a full, lengthy trial. And the other advantage, especially for the victims, is that the victims of, for instance, trafficking in persons, they do not have to come to court to retell their ordeals where they would be re-traumatized. Yes, so this is very advantageous to them. If an accused person is willing to plead guilty, and by the way, plea bargaining is for those who are confident that they have committed the offense. We don't entertain plea bargains for people who believe that they are innocent. So, in this regard, victims are saved from re-traumatization. Yes, their ordeals. And when I talk about a victim-centered approach, also during criminal proceedings in court, we ensure that certain proceedings are held in camera. What do I mean by that? That members of the public, for instance, are not involved in the proceedings, especially when it comes to proceedings that relate to children victims, proceedings that relate to sexual exploitation. So we ensure that these proceedings are held in camera, in private. And then we also ensure that victims of trafficking in persons receive the necessary protection.
So, like if someone is being threatened.
Yes.
For reporting.
Yes. If someone is being threatened, we take into consideration issues of protection. And in that regard, we will ensure that victims are protected, maybe by referring them to shelters, but also in court, we make the necessary applications for the protection of these victims.
So the protection only extends to the victim. How about if I'm the victim, but if they can't get to me, they look for someone that really matters to me?
The protection does not only relate to the victims, it also relates to other witnesses, as long as you are a prosecution witness. And we can tell that there's a threat, an imminent threat. We will ensure that those witnesses are also protected, yes, through our mechanisms that are available. But also we ensure as an office that victims also get the necessary assistance and support. For instance, medical care, food, shelter, psychosocial support. So we are able to coordinate with NGOs, CSOs, and we make the necessary referrals in respect to these cases. So we make sure that these victims get the necessary assistance, support before, during, and after the proceedings. We also ensure that victims of trafficking in persons do not encounter criminalization in respect of offenses that could have been committed by them as a result of trafficking, of their being trafficked. So you find that, for instance, a good number of victims of trafficking in persons are subjected to drug abuse. Some of them are even illegal immigrants.
Yes.
So when we come across such victims, we will not charge them with offenses to do with drug abuse, with illegal entry into the country. So we are cognizant of the fact that they are victims, and we keep them as victims. Yes, we also have what we call the complaints mechanism. Complaints mechanism in the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions that takes into account the concerns of victims and even witnesses of the prosecution. So in case they have any complaints regarding anything, they can always report those complaints and we'll take them into account. When it comes to the complaints mechanism of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, we start from the lowest level because it's hierarchical. So they're expected to report to the lowest office where the offense occurred. And our lowest office is the resident state prosecutor's office or the resident state attorney's office. we have various offices all over the country. So that is the first office, the first point of contact for the office of the DPP. And if the complaint is not resolved properly, or if they still have a complaint, it has not been handled well, then they can escalate it to the regional office, because we have 19 regional offices all over the country. So they can escalate the complaint to the regional office. And if the complaint is not properly handled in the regional office, then they can escalate the complaint to the head office. We have a complaints management office there. So it will be handled. That's the last point of complaining. As the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, also in respect to trafficking in persons cases, we established a trafficking in persons division that is meant to ensure effective management of trafficking in persons cases. And apart from this division, we have focal persons all over the country in our stations, and they coordinate with this office. And this is basically to ensure that these cases are handled efficiently and effectively, that they have successful conclusions. And also we have ensured that prosecutors, investigators, as well as judicial officers are trained extensively on how to handle trafficking in persons cases. Because you see, if you have a case and you have an officer who is not able or who is not skilled enough to handle the case, what do you think will happen to that case? It will not be successful in court. So it's very important that the officers, the prosecutors, that the investigators who investigate the cases, that the judicial officers who hear the cases, that they are skilled on how to handle these cases. So we have done lots of trainings. Over 2,000 officers have been trained as prosecutors, but we have also had trainings that involve other officers that we work with, the investigators and the judicial officers. So we have come a long way in that. Yes.
So as we are giving our parting shots, I would like you to tell the public where they can access, so that you can render to them the help that they require from you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. And where can you find the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions? Like I have said, we have the lowest office, which is the Resident State Attorney's Office or the Resident State Prosecutor's Office all over the country. All you need to ask for is the Resident State Attorney's Office or the Resident State Prosecutor's Office, especially where the offense was committed. That is the jurisdiction. So, for instance, if the offense was committed in Makindi, we have an office in Makindi. It is the Resident State Attorney's Office of Makindi. If it was committed in Hoima, we have the Resident State Attorney's Office of Hoima, of Mbale, of the districts. But when you come to Kampala, there are several offices within Kampala. You, for instance, have we have an office in Buganda Road. We have an office in Makinde. We have an office in Mwangatu. We have an office in Nakawa. We have an office in Entebbe, in Kajansi. So just go to the area where your offense was committed, and you can even find out from the police station where the offense was investigated. But we also have the regional offices.
So if you're not helped at the resident level?
Yes. So if you don't get assistance from the Resident State Attorney's Office, then you can look for the regional office, where that Resident State Attorney's Office falls. So for instance, for Buganda Road, for Makinde, for Mwangatu, all those ones are within Kampala region. And the Kampala regional office is at Workers' House, 7th floor. And then if you're looking for the head office is at Workers' House, 12th floor. That is where the Director of Public Prosecution sits. And if you would like to make a phone call, we have our toll-free line, which is 0800-112300. You can also get assistance by using that toll-free line. And actually, if you called the toll-free line, you can get further assistance on where to go initially if you're confused about where you should start from. So I would advise you to use the toll-free line.
So it has been a very nice interview. We have learned and unlearned a number of things. So I would like you to give your parting shots. Some last words to the Ugandan out there.
To all Ugandans, I would like you to know that the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is a public office. And we, as prosecutors, are lawyers for victims of crime. We are your representatives in matters of criminal proceedings in courts of law. So we represent you. You are our clients. And so it's important for you to cooperate with us. Cooperate with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. And you can do this especially by coming to our office when you are summoned as a witness of crime. Come to our office so that we can take you to court and ensure that you give the necessary evidence for accused persons to be adjudged rightly. Because if you don't come, it means that we cannot have justice in these cases. You are responsible partly for justice, for the justice that is given by the court. We cannot succeed in any case without you. You are our witnesses and we need you for successful prosecutions. So please cooperate with us as and when we need you. Thank you very much.
It was nice having you, Ms. Stratley. I hope each of you out there has learned and unlearned certain misconceptions that you had about the law and the office of the DPP. Till next time, I remain your host, Patricia.